Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to this edition of Get Quick, Get Sick. I'm your host, Cryptochronica. I'm going to teach you how to get sick quickly. Today, we're going to continue our drum series and talk a little bit about making our kicks, our snares, and our hi-hats even more dynamic with some signature layering techniques that are used in, again, every genre of EDM. It's really important to layer. It's kind of the untalked about aspect of sound design that people think just happens from one instrument, but the pros are all layering because it really helps you shape your sound. So we're going to talk about that today. Basically, I haven't changed anything from the last time you tuned in. I've just pulled in some certain Foley samples that I can layer on top of our snares to give what I call a snare detail to our snares, so that they have their own sort of internal grammar and their own internal phrasing unto themselves, which will make them more listenable and more repeatable and more memorizable. So the thing about snares is, especially in breakbeat music like this beat is, I'll play it again for a refresher really quickly. Okay, cool. Yeah, you get the idea. The thing about snares is, in a track at like 140 BPM, if this was a full song and not just a drop, and it had actually been arranged, and we had this proceeding like over the course of 3 or 4 minutes, as most songs tends to be, that snare will get really, really tedious and tiring to the listener's ear if it's the same snare every single time. The human ear hates really blatant repetition. We need there to be a little bit of diversity and dynamics and nuance from one snare hit to another, because that's the instrument that we dance to. That's the instrument that holds the beat spine up. The human ear is really focused on that. And if you ever look at a drummer play or listen to a drummer play in a DAW, somebody from Tool or the Mars Volta, you'll see that every snare hit is actually ever so slightly different, even though it is the same snare head that they are making impact with the stick. Sometimes there might be more body to that snare, sometimes they're hitting it in a slightly different place, and it's changing. The truly, truly talented drum players are hitting the snare in a different way every single time, but at the same volume. So it's still occupying the same sort of pressure and the same sort of space in the track. Well, for us as producers, we're constantly trying to trick the machine into recreating human flaw and human error in our drum beats, because we don't want tedious, mechanical, repetitive, sort of robotic sounding drum machine beats. So one of the things that we can do is layer up our snares with other samples to give them their own flavor and their own sort of taste. So we're going to do that today with our snares. We're also going to make our hi-hats ever so slightly more dynamic with this instrument that I call a hat player, and I will show you how to make and use that, and then you can have that once I'm done with this series. And finally, we're going to make our kicks more dynamic as well, because this is a very, very plain, boring sort of dummy drop and play kind of kick, and we want our kicks to have a little bit of their own internal grammar as well. So let's start with the snare. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group this and put it into its own snare group, because we're going to play all kinds of things within this group. I'm going to get a new channel under here underneath the group. I'm also going to make this a slightly different color so that I can just locate it with my eyes very effortlessly. Now, this is the snare that we have, and listening to it, what we can hear is that it sounds very, very center. So I'm going to check to see that it's mono. I'm also going to pull up a spectrum analyzer so that we see what kind of frequencies it's occupying. Although this snare, if I was going by ear, I would say it has a lot of like bite. It's a little bit sharp in the 8000s. And it doesn't seem like it has as much punch or body in the 1000s, kind of where a lot of snare strength lies. I will say that it has a strong fundamental sound. So I can see that it's got a pretty beefy fundamental right here. This is a E or a D sharp. Let's double check. Looks like this snare is hovering right on D sharp. Oh, actually more like 160. So this is a snare in E. It's trying to make up its mind if it wants to be a D sharp or an E snare. And then we can see that we're missing quite a bit of information here. There's a big dip where the snare is normally supposed to lay. Snares often take a shape that's a little bit more like this, so that you have a lot of these meaty, powerful frequencies in the 1000 range being occupied by the snare itself. That's really where it's got to impact. Because if you'll remember, that sort of push and pull, back and forth punching between the kick, the boom, ka, boom, boom, ka, that is what is driving the speakers to push their air and make us bounce back and forth and dance to that air that the speakers are expressing. So we want these lower frequencies to be occupied by air and to be pushing us with their mass. Now, I can also see that right here in the pain zone from about 2,500 hertz to about 5,000, more like 4,500, that's a really sensitive area of the frequency range for the human ear, because we've talked about it before, that's where babies cry. And so humans necessarily have to be really sensitive to that region, because if we don't notice our babies crying in the wild, they might be eaten by, a bear or a wolf, or they're hungry or distressed in some way. And if we're not responsive to the needs of our young die, and then our species dies. So we make sure nature has equipped us with a particularly sensitive threshold, right from about 2,500 to 4,000. So this region is a little bit sharp. It's not the 8,000s that I thought it was. The 8,000s are closer up to here. There's actually a little bit of a dip. So it's more right here in the pain zone that is causing that bite that I find a little bit unpleasant. So we might tame that with the snare too and make it a really pleasant sounding snare. I'll show you some tricks for that. Now I'm going to open up our ozone imager, and I can see that it's straight line, it's completely mono. So a snare is fundamentally got 4 parts, and this is what we want to do whenever we're stacking and layering noises, be it bass, be it chords, be it leads. Not so much leads, but particularly bass, chords, and snares. We want to break them into 4 kind of parts, and those parts are the punch, the body, the width, and the highs. So this snare, it has a good punch. It definitely has this nice fundamental. So that is occupied. But its body, which I would classify from like 400 to like 2,000, is kind of lacking in the snare. So we want to fix up our body. Our highs are there. We do have some high information, but I'm not sold on them yet. So we might want to look at something that can occupy our higher range that's more interesting or more elegant. And then finally, its width, it has nothing. It has no width to talk about. So that might be the thing to start with and to fix right away. But we also want to give it a detail so that this snare is different than this snare, and this snare is different than this snare. We kind of want it to be like snare 1A, snare 1B, snare 1A, snare 1C. And that's sort of in grammar where it's like boom, ka. Oh wait, I'm doing the kick wrong. If it's like boom, ka, we might want this to be boom, boom, so it's a different flavor snare there, and that ka is going to give us a sort of back and forth that I find very desirable. So let's dive in and stop talking about it and just start doing some production. So I pulled up these Foley noises, and this one is like a Zippo lighter sound. So it's got a little bit of a metallic component. This is like a clipper noise. It's got a little bit of like a shaker sound right before it starts. This is a glass hit. I like these sort of noises, and these are great things to give our snare some character. So that's just like a click. This is another sort of snare that I like the top for, so I might steal the highs on that. But I've also got these 2 claps here, and these claps are occupying our highs in a way that I really like. That's really bright, and that's also really bright. So I think I'm going to layer those onto our highs. But before we start with our highs, let's make sure that we can clean up some of the snares highs. So I'm going to low shelf it and take that stuff off, probably about 2,000 hertz. So yeah, we're cutting that out a little bit. I'm going to bring down the fader as well, because we don't need anything higher than 4,000 here. I'm going to clear off those highs so we can occupy them with something else. Cool. So that's kind of a muddy sounding snare, but it's still giving us what we want, which is that fundamental punch. So we're looking for body, we're looking for highs, we're looking for wides. I say we start with let's start with the highs. I'm going to pull in my 2 claps here. I'm going to name this claps, and I'm going to alternate them. And we're going to talk about getting them in the right position. Now, my first thought is that we want our snares to be in phase with one another. I don't want this snare hitting and then kind of canceling out the phase of this snare. I want them to be harmonious with one another. So I'm going to line them up to make sure that they're upswing. they're when the sample is starting going on the up positive voltage from the very beginning, I'm going to make sure that that's happening with this one on the positive voltage and not on the negative voltage. So I'm going to do that kind of like this and look at them pretty closely. I can see that right here is where the snare sample is really starting, and right about here is where this one's, oops, really close in there, where this one's transient is starting. It's kind of like pinched off a little bit right here, but I would say that first upswing transient is right there. So I want to match those up. So now this is going up as this is going up. Those two positive voltages should be additive, and they should both be louder together. Now we also have a little bit of this interesting sort of stuff happening before the snare hits, and that's okay, that's cool. We're going to talk about that a lot today with our snares, and it's called a pre-transient, where you have a little bit of noise kind of introduced to the sample before the main transient sound hits. Now, another thing about transients is that you only really need one transient at a time to smash into the ceiling and into the floor of the limiter. Because if you have two transients, what will happen is if they're out of phase, and one is going up and the other is going down, those two transients are going to cancel and you'll get a dead spot of silence. But say you have two transients in phase like this one and this one, which we've just established, well, those are both going up at the same time. And what that's going to do is it's going to hit our limiter with just a pinprick of distortion. And it's going to sound kind of shitty. So we don't actually need both of these transients here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just, I think I'm probably, this is a bigger transient, so maybe I'll just nip this one a little bit. And I don't need to fade it off that much, but I'm going to nip it like so that it doesn't quite hit as hard. This will be our main transient. And I'll move this over just a little bit. So that's our main transient. That's going to be the one that we're focused on more than the other. That's perfect. Now this snare, let's balance them in volume first. So this one I think was at -12, kind of where it should be. We have our limiter on, so let's take that off. So I mapped that to 1, I did, okay, cool. So this is -13 now, because with that transient and with those highs, it was at -12, but I've cut off some of the highs and I've cut off that first sharp initial transient. Let's make sure our clap is at -12 as well. So that's a really loud clap. Let's come down in volume on this, drop it -12. Cool. So that now together, those two sounds are like so. Cool, that's working. I'm also going to put a spectrum analyzer and a isotope ozone imager on top of the whole group so I can see them working together. Now I can see that there's a little bit of width, but fundamentally this is pretty straight, pretty much right down the middle. And looking at our spectrum analyzer, I can see that without this clap, we don't have many highs, but we still have that peak there. I might even cut this a little bit more. You know what? Let's just cut that off. Okay, yeah, that's pretty much just a punch now, but still no body. So say we really like that tone, and we know the song is going to be in E, D sharp E, but mostly E. We've got a tone that is at a fundamental of E, so that's a good place to start for our punch. Now, if we layer up this clap, let's see what kind of shape we've got. Okay, now we have this area tamed a little bit. We have a peak here, a little dip there, but they sound pretty good. So I'm still kind of looking for something right in this region, in the 1000 region, to give this some more body. So let's do that. Let's find another sample. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to pull up one of our Flava samples and see what we can use. I like the Zippo noise. Oh, it's being affected by that EQ on this channel. So let's get this onto a separate channel. Voila. Okay, that's got a nice sort of metallic pink to it that I think will sound great inside of a reverb. And we're definitely going to put reverb on these snares because reverb is so fun and so flavorful and really tasty. So we will do that. So let's line this up with our snares that we are kind of leaning towards. I'm going to put that right here. Now, like we were saying, we don't need all these transients to hit at once. So this big ass transient, we do not need to be there. So I'm just going to cut it, kill it, and now it's faded off, but we still have a sort of metallic noise coming through. So it sounds like it's a higher metallic noise. Let's look at it. By itself, it's got this big, it's got that big spike right there. So that might not be what we're looking for. Oh, Hold on. Hey, dude, what's up? Pretty good. What's going on? No worries, man. You let me know. Yeah, no, I'm gonna be around today, just recording videos and doing some work. Okay, cool. Yeah, no worries. Sounds good, dude. Take it easy. Bye. All right, cool. I guess I don't have to stop recording. That wasn't that long. Maybe you guys were smart enough to just zip through the video. Also, I recommend watching these videos at like 1.25 speed anyway, so that you can really uh, accelerate them and learn at a faster rate. So that's not the snare that we really need. That's got a little bit of body. That's a good one. I like that. It's also got some panning. We can see that this sample here has got more information on the left side, on the oh, it's actually on the right side, sorry. So on the right side, we can see over here that it's louder on the right. It's a stereo sample, which is cool. So that could give us some interesting width stuff. So I'm gonna do that, keep that transient kind of in order, and I will move that over. Now I think this has got some nice body noises. Come on. Cool, so that's got a lot of body. This will fit there really nicely. It's also got a little bit of a fundamental, which I don't know if we need. They're kind of lining up. Cool, yeah, so those are lining up nicely, and they sound decent together. I might take off some of the highs on this, just cut them a little bit. Cool, and I'm gonna cut off that bleed through in the bottom. Cool, because that's kind of the part of this sample that I'm focused on. I want that metallic character, and I mostly want it in the body range. Okay, cool. So now we have this together. Let's balance this one. Volume, so 6, that's too loud. Let's come down 6 or 7 decibels, minus 7. Cool, so that's 13. Okay, cool. Cool, so now the snare is definitely more full frequency. It's a little bit flatter. There's still a little bit of a peak here in the 2000s, but that's part of the nature of this clap. I don't hate it. It sounds decent, but maybe we can just do a dip in there, right about here. Cut some of that bleed off because I don't think we need anything below 90 hertz in a snare. I mean, I guess you could, but not for this snare. So this whole thing is coming in at minus 7.8 in volume. That's pretty loud, and that's awesome. Lots of layers. It's definitely got a metallic component. Okay, cool. We'll just say that that works for now. That snare shape is looking pretty good. Oh, now that dip is not doing what I want. Come on. Come on, friend. Do what I want. Let's see how that looks. Okay, cool. So we've got a little bit of a dip there. Maybe we can fix that by filling it in with something else. That other sample had a peak. It had a spike. Not where we want it. Okay, yeah, well that'll be our first snare hit. Now let's take a look at our second snare hit. We've got this big clap that has been completely brick-walled through a limiter, and that's okay. We're gonna expand this out so that it's actually a useful sample, and then we're gonna run it through our own limiter and get that kind of super smashed, really cutting, really loud sample that you find in dubstep and that you find in heavy genres of bass music. Because the ideal shape that we are going for is kind of this original sample shape. We're looking for that triangle where we're going to cut very sharp with the transient, and then the snare is going to decay away with this like body and then slowly taper out with the tail. And with some reverb, this tail is going to go a lot further. But fundamentally, this knife shape, this triangular shark fin kind of shape is what you're looking for out of drum samples. especially your kick and your snare. Now, this clap is so loud, but it's been completely brick walled. So this is like a mastered sample. This is a drag and drop kind of dummy sample. You get this from a sample project or a sample library, and you just bring it into your project and it's ready to use with no processing. Well, we're trying to process it because I don't want their clap, I want my clap. So their clap is cool, but it doesn't have any body, and I've kind of upped the highs a little bit, so it's nice and bright, but it's not very hard hitting, and we need that boom cut to be knocking people around. We want to feel kicked in the throat by volume. So I'm going to come down, balance this one a little bit closer to that. Maybe not that much, maybe just 2 decibels, minus 2 decibels. And we're going to expand this together when we run this whole thing through a glue compressor, because we want to really glue these samples together. We want the body and the punch and the wides and the highs to all be one cohesive sample. So I'm going to show you how to overcome this kind of brick-walled, already processed sample. It's not the end of the world to turn these into our own samples. Okay, cool. So I like the highs on this. Let's just check that its transient is kind of out of the way. So this one will use the transient of this snare. And so now it's like we're playing 2 different transients even. The first one, we've got the transient of this clap, and then the second one, we're going to have the transient of the snare. So there's a give and a take even in that, which is really cool. I'm going to move my face down over where it's not in my fucking way. Okay, now, that's not a terrible noise, but it's not great. I want to, it's actually pretty well balanced. I think I want a little bit more oomph and body right here in the lower mids. So I think there are some things that we could do to bring that out. I could always do a crazy boost, but that's not necessarily what I'm looking for right now. Let me see if I can find another sample with some info in that region. So that's got a nice click. Oh, I do like that snare. Let's see if we can mix this in there somehow too. So we'll put that there, and we've got that. This noise is, we'll get this on a separate channel because I don't want to cut everything off. I like its highs. I do want to give it an EQ, take a look at it. God damn it, now my face is in the way over here. Okay. Oh, perfect. This has a nice big hump right in that area that I'm looking for. So I don't know if I need all of these highs. I'll take them down a little bit, but I do like that. I do very much like that body, because that's going to fill this out a lot. So let's make sure this is balanced in volume. I can imagine that we need to come down at least 12 decibels. Okay, there we go. Let's do the whole thing. Oh yeah, that's got thump. That's got much more of a boost in that region now, so it's hitting a lot harder. Maybe not that much of a boost. Okay, cool. So I'll put that down a little bit, and I might restore some of the highs. Yeah, that's got kind of a nice tone. Okay, cool. So now this, I'm noticing that this clap over here is just way wider than this one. So those aren't going to jive very well. It'll be like a thin and then sort of wide clap. Okay, yeah, that one's way wider. So we want these to be about the same width. The first thing I'm going to do is, I think it might be time to put this on its own and copy these over, because I don't know if this one needs the boost there. And we can cut a little bit more of this. Sweet. Now this is much, much brighter. And it's, so we're going to have to focus on the width of this one. And I think we're going to have to focus on the volume. So that's 5 decibels minus 7 decibels. So this one is all a little bit too loud. Let's come down minus 4 decibels here. Come down another minus 1.5. Cool. So they're a little bit closer in volume. I think it might be time to start to blend these two snares and work on their width. So in getting width, what you should do is you should actually set different samples out to the sides. So I'm going to do that like so. I'm going to find some shakers, which they work really well for this. And we'll start to blend some shakers in. So use your library. Let me go to shakers, presets, instruments, instrument rack. We've got shakers 2. So we're going to do some duplicate channels with these shakers. And the very first thing that we're going to do is try and expand the width of this first one. So let me get a sample that I like. That works. I don't love that, but it's a sample. Okay, cool. So we've got this one sample here, and why don't we pan that pretty far to the left? Okay, cool. Now I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to do the same exact thing, because we want these snares to be moving around. So I'm going to take these layers, I'm going to paste them here, like so. I'm going to take these layers, and I'm going to paste them over here, but I'm going to change something about them. Let's take this sample, and we're going to put that right there, but on this channel, and I'm going to actually alternate these. So this one's to the left, this one we will put off to the right, and let's duplicate it up. We will get this one off to the left, and we're going to find a different sample so that this one's even wider. That works. That's cool. It's off to the left. And we've got to come down in volume on all of these. I know I'm using the faders. It's okay because we're going to blend these all into one sample. And I know we're supposed to avoid the faders, but we're going to make an exception right now. So that's okay for now. Together these go like so, 14. So let's come down even more to like maybe 16 or 18. So minus 15, 3 more decibels, 16, minus 18, perfect. Okay, cool. So now, as a whole, our samples, our snare samples are going back and forth a lot more, but they still kind of sound like different elements, kind of off in different places. I'm hearing that shaker, but it works. So we've got this metallic sounding synth or snare. Let's blend them together and get some more width out of them using some plugins and some reverb and some choruses and stuff. Okay, cool. So the first thing I'm going to definitely put on all of these is a compressor, glue compressor to be exact, because I want to glue them together. Now, what the glue compressor is great at is making samples kind of be pushed into the same sort of space. And there's a lot of settings on this that should be understood. Now, the first setting that should be understood is when it's all the way slow attack. What this is doing as our compressor is it's going to shape that knife-like shape that we find really desirable, because the transient is going to trigger the compressor and it's going to have a slow onset where it takes a long time for the compressor to come to its compression, which gives us that knife-like sharp cutting shape, which is awesome. That's exactly what we want. So that's going to be the first thing. I'm going to make a new channel right here. I'm going to turn this on to resampling, and I'm going to make it armed so that I can see exactly what I'm doing with my samples. So I've selected just the snares, and let's record. Let's also just record kind of these two loops right here. Do it like that. Okay, cool. I'll bring this up a little bit. So we can see that we're getting a very triangular shape here. Turn this down so we don't have to listen to it while I talk. We can see that we're getting, oh, goodness gracious. Let's not do that. Let's put that back at 0. Okay, well, I'm just gonna have to talk over it. So we can see that we're getting that nice, desirable triangular shape. We have a little bit of that pre-transient, and then over on this one, we have quite a bit of impact right on that transient. So that is this thing right here. I'm actually letting too many transients hit at once, and that's what's giving that peak. So I'm gonna move this forward, and this is gonna be a transient before these other transients, which is gonna be interesting. Let's see what that looks like once we resample it. Oh, that sounds super good. And that's actually giving us a really nice shape. A little bit of a slow onset, but we still got a nice beefy transient right in the beginning. So I don't know if I love that, but we can work with it for this. It looks like a pretty good sample. But I'm going to go into my compressor and start doing a few more things to make this that we got that triangular shape, which is what we were after. But I'm going to push it a little bit harder, and I also want this kind of heavy, solid, very thick brick-walled snare sound, so we can just really punch the audience with that noise. So let's try and get that. I am going to turn the recording back on, and we're going to watch it as we do it. Cool. So in our snare group, I'm going to start to come down on the threshold. Oh, I'm not even compressing and we have that triangular shape. This should be great then. So I'm going to give it about 5 dB of compression. So I'm going to wait for that to kick into about 5 dB. Nice, there we go. And let's see that is a waveform. Okay, cool. That's really got that triangular shape. And so does that. You can see the compression is hit and then slow down. There, it comes in slowly with 30 milliseconds of compression. It's a nice shape. Now let's try and brick wall it and smash it into a limiter so it's got a lot more volume and impact. People like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on soft clipping and I'm going to kick up the makeup gain until I start to see that clip going on. And it'll be a little yellow light. The soft clipping keeps it from peaking, so it's going to limit it, essentially. It's going to block the sample from being able to go into the above zero range, but it's going to give it a really nice sort of warmth and loudness that comes from being smashed into a limiter, at least with the cytonic glue compressor. So let's push that shit hard. So we're still not even clipping. We haven't even started clipping yet. Oh man, look how big that snare is. Let's push this until we clip. Okay, now we're starting to clip. And we can see that we're starting to clip because this light is going on. And we can look up here, and if we get in real close on the sample, you'll see that it starts to get squared off up at the top. We haven't even pushed it so hard, but this is a good one. It's getting flattened up at the top. And if you go back down to the sample that I pulled out of the sample pack, this thing has been completely squared off at the top. It's basically just a flat bar. So maybe we should push it that hard. I doubt that's necessary. I like having cutting transients and cutting snares that really have that triangular shape and cut through the mix. But we can push this guy a little bit harder because we'll probably introduce some heavy basses to this track in a few episodes. So let us do that again and really get to pushing. This is all the way, and you can really see how flattened that snare has been up at the top. This thing is like pretty brick walled. That's cool. That's cool. It's not the coolest thing in the world because we do want to leave some room for compression later on down the line. We don't want this to be over compressed. We want there to be some room for the limiter to work at the end of the process. So let's come back off of that. I'll probably come down to 13 or 14 decibels of compression, or of makeup gain. Cool, so we've got some peaks, we've got some clear transients, but it's still a pretty thick snare. It's really loud, and that's awesome. So we've got those two snares now. Let's run this all the way across so that we can get all 4 of our snares before we start to break them up into even more portions, now that we have our compression working. Let us do that. All right, here we go, one more time. Cool, so now we have 4 dry snares. They've been compressed, they've been glued together, that's perfect. Let's turn this off, let's close this down, and let's stop thinking about it and free up some mind space. Now we've got that triangular shape, really sharp transients, it's really clear and coming through, but these tails don't really do exactly what we want. Oh, also the whole spectrum, the frequency spectrum, has been occupied by these snares. So we have a full-bodied snare with a nice big punchy fundamental. Check that one. Same thing, nice big punchy snare with a fundamental. I think they're relatively spaced as far as width goes. That second one definitely is, and the first one It's got some width, but we can push that out a little bit more because I do want a little bit of this fundamental out into the stereo range. Snares and kicks do not have to be mono anymore. We do not exist in a vinyl paradigm. So we can push that stuff into stereo ever so slightly. I know a lot of people are going to argue with me about this, but even subs can actually be pushed into the stereo space. And instead of getting that straight mono line right down the middle, you kind of want the ever so slight carrot shape. You want your subs to take a little bit of a carrot shape. So we're going to try and get that with our subs once we bring them in. We're going to do that with our kicks as well. But let's give this snare some a little bit more diversity, because again, diversity is the spice of life. So let's give this some verb diversity. So it's talking to itself with a sort of a give and take of reverbs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up. I'm going to pull up some verbs. And you can do all kinds of effects here. I mean, erosion sounds great on a snare, downsampling if you do it ever so slightly. Let's get, what am I looking for? I'm looking for reverb. Cool. So Ableton, Ableton's reverb is, it does the trick. It's okay. It's not terrible. But what I didn't know until relatively recently is each of these are actually different reverbs. And I thought that they were just different grades of the same reverb, like eco, mid, and high would be the highest quality. Actually, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ableton, but from what I'm understanding more and more, is that the eco is a plate verb, and the high is a hall verb, and the mid is a room verb. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that's correct, so don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. I've heard it from some pretty credible sources. I won't say who, that's okay. But I'm also going to throw on this EQ because I want to shape the reverb exactly as I want it. And I could use these, but I don't trust them to do it exactly as precisely as an actual EQ can. I'm also going to duplicate this channel because I want these reverbs to be 100% wet. So I have a dry that is not being affected at all. And I'm going to have a wet verb that I'm going to be able to get a lot of control over because I can literally have it on a different channel. I'm going to blend them together afterwards as well. So we don't need everything about this snare to be completely verbed. And it's honestly kind of good to close off your verbs ever so slightly like this, because when you have a lot of verbs without a high cut, you're getting a lot of like washy noises up in the 10,000s and the 7,000, 12,000 range that isn't necessary. And it makes your mix sound kind of thin and flat. It's also good to get your reverbs on a separate channel because you can sidechain them, and you should sidechain your reverbs to your kicks and your snares so that your kicks and your snares really cut through the mix. So we're going to start with a plate verb. Plate verbs sound great on snares. We're going to have it be, yeah, all this stuff is fine. Maybe we'll turn up the reflection. Oh, no, we'll turn up the diffusion a little bit. Cool. I also turned off the chorus and the spin. I think the spin sounds really cheesy. And the chorus, we're going to put on a different effect. We're going to actually put on a chorus. So I'm going to take it off of this, So we have these two groups. Let's group these now. This is our snare group 2, snare 2. Solo the whole thing. Okay, cool. So that's coming through nicely. Now we're going to definitely want to control the volume of this reverb because we don't need it to be that loud. And now that it's on a separate channel, it's really easy to do that. So we'll come up to probably like 220, and then I'll cut it off here all the way down at 130. So none of that reverb is getting below 100 hertz. Even that might be a little bit low, but that's okay for this. And I'm also going to cut it at 4,000 and then cut it a little bit more sharply. Oops. I'm going to cut it more sharply here with the 6th pole at 7,000. So that way nothing is getting up above there. Cool. So this is all that's coming through with that reverb now. A lot of body. Got a little bit of that metallic component. Same with this. And it's not too long. Now the trick is to see exactly how long we want our plates and our halls to carry out, because I don't want this one's reverb carrying into this one. These are different snares. I want the reverb to kind of arch down and be completely concluded by the time this snare hits. So I'm going to select this, and if you'll remember, down in our bottom left-hand corner, you can see exactly how long any amount of the grid is once you've selected it. So this whole duration, if you look right here, that whole duration is 1 second and 714 milliseconds. So 1.2 should work. Okay, I think that's still a bit much for a plate verb, so I'm going to come down to like 900. Okay, yeah, that's nice. That's chill. That works fine. I'm also going to drop this in the volume. So if our main snare, which we want, it should be at 0 now. Yep, 0.25 because we've rammed it into that limiter. I want this to be -12. So because that will be balanced with our kick. So I'm going to come down -12 with our main snare. Chill, come up in volume here. So that's at -12.2, and we're going to want our reverb to be much quieter in relation to our snare. We don't want them to be the same volume. So I find that reverbs, snare verbs can be about -36 decibels. Other reverbs should often be a lot quieter on a separate channel, like -42 decibels. But for the snare reverb, it can be big, it can be noticeable. So let's kick that down to -36. So it's at -17 now, so let's drop it 19 decibels. So that's -36.1. And now, together, they should sound like this. You know, maybe it's too quiet, so let's come down to 17. Cool, that sounds really good. It's putting the snare into a space that I like. Now I'm going to duplicate it and do another thing. I'm going to turn this verb off, and with this reverb, I'm going to kick this up to high so that it's a hall verb. I'm going to open this one up a lot more. I want it to ring out a lot more. Okay, cool, that sounds really good. It could probably even be 2,500 seconds, which is 2.5 seconds. Awesome, it's perfectly concluded by the time this next snare hits. Let's come up in density. We want these to be ever so slightly different and noticeable. We'll make it a little bit bigger. We'll make the width a little bit smaller. Okay, cool. The same verb should work, or I'm sorry, the same EQ should work, but it's always a good idea to have the actual EQs change a little bit too. So we can have this second snare kind of just be the higher part. And so I'll put this at 200, so it's cutting off at 200 and it's completely disappeared by 150. And then I can put this other guy up to about 300. So now we're just getting a narrower band of highs. So it's not going to be as low hitting and as wide as this first reverb was. So that could be cool. It'll be like a lower verb and then a higher verb, a lower verb and a higher verb. So there will be a lift on that second hit. Now that I've got both of those, I'm going to freeze and flatten. Be comfortable with them. So freeze tracks and flatten those tracks. And now, you know what? I'm actually going to undo both of those, and I'm going to take off the utilities. So I know it's 17 decibels that I can come down, but I want to be able to see it right now with where we are. And I'm a very visual learner, so being able to see my snares and my reverbs is awesome. Flatten those. Okay, chill. So totally different reverbs here, and we're going to checkerboard them so that they give and they take a little bit. And this is what's called the checkerboarding process. We're going to talk so much about this when it comes to synthesizing basses and getting good bass phrases and good like chord phrases and stuff like that, because you want there to be this sort of back and forth give and a take. And this kind of looks like a checkerboard, so that's why it's called that. Cool. Now we have two different reverbs over two different snares. So we have a lot going on in these snares. Each of these snare hits is completely different. So these need to come down 17 decibels, -17, -17. And they sound like this. I'm going to turn on the limiter. Cool. So those are two totally different snares now going back and forth. We could add even more details to make these snares really stand out. A great detail to put on top of a snare is the age-old vocal chant, the hey, hey. That works so well. Hays and yas are so solid in electronic music because they're positive words. Yeah and hey are both affirmative. So it's about energy. It's about saying yes to new things. It's about dancing. It's not like somebody's like, fuck, or no, no. I mean, you could do that, but it might be kind of weird. It might not vibe so well. I suppose you could make really negative sounding music. It just wouldn't appeal to people who are trying to have a good vibe on their drugs, and we want to appeal to those people. So try what you want, don't let me limit you. So now another good idea for snare details is that water drop, that like kind of noise, like water hitting a pond. That's a super great snare detail. The bucket sound where it's like a bucket snare, like a low tunk. There's a really great finger bells are super solid. So there's any kinds of things that you could layer up on these and compress them again even more and get some flavor in those snares. But right now the snare is doing something that I like. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to duplicate this all the way across so that our snare is a little bit more dynamic than it was. Stretch this out. And we have it all together. Okay, cool. So I think this works much, much better. Cool, so that's it now. And before, just for the sake of demonstration, I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna put this over here underneath our kick. Before it was like this. So without these snares, this was our beat before I started to make our snare special. It's tedious, right? Now that you know that there can be differences and diversities, it just seems so tedious to go backwards. I didn't even do that much. All right, so the next little trick for our snares, let's say we like these snares a lot. Let's put in a pre-transient because I really want our snares to be 1A, 1B, 1A, 1C. So that means I need snares 1B and 1C to still be different. And right now they are actually the same. So this is this big snare with the nice big long verb. It sounds really good, but we want this snare to be the same and this snare to be the same, which they are, but we want these two, 1B and 1C, to be different. So the difference that we're going to use in this case is what's called the pre-transient. And the pre-transient is something that happens before the snare impacts. It happens before this transient comes in. So if you think about the sound of like a whip has got a perfect pre-transient. A whip is not just a noise. A whip is that noise is exactly what gives the whip that whip snare noise, that signature whip sound. So we're going to put in a pre-transient, that sort of before these, so that 1B and 1C are different and distinct. Now there are millions of things that you could use as a pre-transient. You could honestly just take a little bit of this right here, and I could just copy that right like that and consolidate it so it's its own thing, reverse it, and I could put this right before my snare so that I get like a sort of reverb whip up fill sound before the actual sample. So that's cool. That's okay. It's not terrible, but it's also not that inventive because we also have this reverb coming out from the back. So let's try and be a little bit more inventive. So I'm going to name this pre-trans. And so tails work, you know, reverb tails, snare tails, all that stuff works just fine. But I'm going to do what I think is much more interesting and is like a great contribution to electronic music. And I'm pretty sure this came from dubstep. But this is the Foley pre-transient, where you find a bit of Foley. So I'm going to just type this in here, go to all results. I got all kinds of different Foley noises. Anyway, yeah, you got all kinds of different things, and you can just use a few clicks or a few like kind of noises to do a pre-transient that works really well and is really tasty. That would be perfect if we were going for like a watery kind of song. Oh, that's like exactly what I'm looking for. Oh, so is that. Okay, negativist, you are a god. So let's grab Let's grab that one. That one's really dope. And let's grab that first one that I heard. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Okay, cool. So I don't need all this stuff. I really just kind of like these little clicks in the beginning and the end. So this first one, this click is awesome, but I don't need it to hit at the same time as my snare. This is a pre-transient, so it should be concluded by the time of my transient. So let's put this like that. Now I'm gonna kill that. I can probably kill all this. And I'm just gonna fade it up, fade it in. So it's got a little bit of information, but it's more like a scratch before our sound. And if this is where our transient is right here, we want this to be completely silent and concluded. So they're gonna get a little bit of a bleed through right in this grid square right there. Let's hear how that sounds. Let's also shape our volume because I know that, yeah, that's at 0. So that's way too loud. Jesus, I have so many burps coming through me right now. Okay, let me come down like, I don't know, 18 decibels, minus 18, because this is almost a hi-hat kind of register noise, and we don't want to hurt people's ears, because remember, people hear the higher frequencies far more sensitively because of evolution. All right, so minus 10, geez. No, we want it to be even quieter. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got my limiter on. Oops, there we go, turn the limiter off. What do we got? So minus 22, which is pretty good. Let's come up a little bit. Minus 16 decibels. So minus 20 decibels, let's come up even more. Minus 14 decibels for minus 18 reading. Cool. I'm gonna put that limiter back on, so guard your ears, and we're gonna hear how this snare sounds now. Actually, let's do a pre-transient on the other one, different pre-transient, so that way they're doing that give and take that I'm talking about this lesson a lot. So I'm going to do it this way. And I'm going to reverse this. I'm going to consolidate, and then I'm going to reverse, come over here, and we will put this one like that. And then remember, I don't want the transients to land at the same time, so I'm going to fade this off just so that it's completely concluded before this next sample starts. Let's check how loud this one is. It's coming in at minus 9. Oh, it's coming in at minus 21 without the limiter. So that's pretty quiet. And you know what? I don't think we need all that. That's like the loudest part. That's where the escalation is. So that's kind of what I want to grab. Cool. That looks good. So now we have 2 different pre-transients here. So we have alternating reverbs, we have alternating snares, and now we have alternating pre-transients. All kinds of complexity. That's 21. That's fine. I'm going to put the limiter back on, and I'm just going to copy these over as they play, and you can hear how that exchange, that interchange works really well with the snares. Sweet, yeah, it's totally cool. It totally works well. And, you know, we could honestly have these sort of pre-transients be more than pre-transients and sort of be like post-transients as well. And I think I'm going to play with that. How big was that? Okay, cool. I'm going to try something here, and this might not work, but this noise is just super cool. Whatever you did negativis to get this is awesome. That's super fun. So I want this part, so I'm going to kill that. I'm going to take what I want because I want it. And this is music, so you can't really hurt anybody. You can only help people. I'm going to consolidate, and I'm going to reverse it to make it my own. And then I will put this over here at the end of this transient. And so I'm not going to, or excuse me, at the end of the snare. I don't want this to happen every single time. I also want this to drop in volume at least 6 decibels because I don't want this to be what you focus on. You're supposed to be focused on the snare, but it's cool. So I think maybe a little bit of something like that could be really interesting. So let's try that noise now. Might be a bit much. What if we put it on the one that doesn't have anything? Let's put that there. That's kind of a cool noise. All right, well, I'm not going to get all bogged down with this. You guys can play with this as you want, but these little Foley tricks will really help spice up the flavor of the snare, and there is so much to be said about that. Nobody wants boring, unspicy food. People want spice in their food. Salt and pepper are what drove human history. They were the founders of the spice trade for so long. So give people some salt and pepper in their drum beats. That's cool. I don't know if I love it. We'll just leave it there because I'm kind of lazy at this point. We'll make it really subtle. Sweet. So now we have all kinds of things happening in these snares. And now I can copy this one over so that it's not happening on that first snare, just that second one. And that is how you make a lot of snare diversity. Okay, I guess since that took a little bit longer than I thought, I'm going to stop this video here and we'll make this like the snare layering one. And next time I will do kicks and I will do hi-hats. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning into this edition of Get Quick, Get Sick. Today we covered snare layering and a little bit of glue compression to get your snares and your samples to expand over compressed drums and then to kind of re-brick wall it and use that limiter to smash it so it's nice and loud and full sounding and useful to you in EDM. All right, I am your host, Cryptochronica. Talk to you later.